Relationship matters. We need relationships with other people. And the ultimate expression of relationship is this thing we all agree exists called love. Now let me ask you this. Where does this thing called love come from? If your answer, like God, is love, is God, this love that we know, that we experience comes from God, I would agree. You see, we were made in the image of God. Our characteristics, let me stop there. We were made in the image of God. Does that mean that somewhere in the celestial places there's a guy walking around that looks like Roger? Well, kind of. But I believe, and I think we can be fairly certain, that when God says to us, I made you in my image, He is talking far less about our physical characteristics and far more about our wiring, the essence of who we are as beings. That He has wired us, hardwired us to be like Him. Our characteristics are modeled after His characteristics. And one of God's eternal qualities is love. In 1 John chapter 4, we read this challenge. Let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. God is love. So there is this thing called love that we know, that we experience. We experience because we get our characteristics from God who created us. And we know that one of God's eternal qualities is love. God is love. Let me throw this out there for you to chew on. Suppose that God was just one person. Okay? And now turn and really put on your imagination caps, and I want you to go back before time, before creating things existed. Back to that time when there was only God. There was no earth, no galaxy, no people, no beings, just God. One God, by Himself. Okay? Now, add love to that. Huh?
Love yourself.
Yeah, love yourself, right? I guess. But there would be no concept for loving others or being loved by others or being intimately connected and engaged with in relationship with others in this thing called love. It couldn't be. Without somebody to love, there is no love. And now you might say, well, but that's why God did this. That's why God created us. He had an idea of love and wanted an opportunity to enjoy this love, and so He made us. Right? Even if there were such a thing as theoretical love, that would suggest that God would need us to love Him. That God needs us. But God does not need us to know and experience love and relationship, because He already does, and He always had known love and relationship in a perfect way. I want you to imagine that there's somebody that you are drawn to more than any other person in the world. There is nothing you wouldn't do for this person or to be with this person. And your heart's desire is to spend time with and to be intimately connected with the person. And let's suppose that you then discover that he or she feels the exact same way about you. And the two of you enter into this happily ever after. Maybe it's just a close friendship, or maybe it's a romantic relationship and marriage. Does that sound like heaven? Yes. Because it comes from heaven. That very notion of a love relationship that's beautiful comes from the heart of heaven. from God. Because God exists within himself in a perfect, eternal relationship. John spoke of this earlier. That God exists within himself in a perfect, eternal relationship of pure and perfect love. The three persons of the Godhead, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, are, always will be, and always have been in a perfect relationship with each other. It's impossible for us to sort of even get a picture of what that could look like. There's a beautiful word called perichoresis, which means this intimate intercoursing, which is a reference to the way that the Trinity relates, that the persons of the Godhead relate with each other. And it's this sort of pulsating interaction, constant, perfect, pure, beautiful, choreographed, relating and loving and connecting. It's a dance. I think it's like a dance. You think about the kind of relationship that God has with God. It's like this indescribable dance. And so we say, where does man come in then? Why are we here? If God doesn't need us so that he can be loved because he already has perfect love within himself, why does he need us and where do we come in? Historian George Marston was summarizing Jonathan Edwards in this way as he asked that very question. Why would such an infinitely good, perfect, and eternal being create man? The ultimate reason that God creates is not to remedy some lack in God, but to extend that perfect internal communication of the triune God's goodness and love. God's joy and happiness and delight in divine perfection is expressed externally by communicating that happiness and delight to created beings. The universe is an explosion of God's glory. Perfect goodness, beauty, and love radiate from God and draw creatures to ever increasingly share in the Godhead's joy and delight. The ultimate end of creation, then, is union and love between God and loving creatures. In Timothy Keller's book, The Reason for God, there's a chapter that he calls the Dance of God. And I think it's a beautiful chapter, and I think it's a beautifully titled chapter because of that image of the dance of God. And it's as a dance that Timothy Keller begins to look at and view this relationship of the Godhead, the three persons of the Godhead with one another. I want you to put on your imaginations right now like we were walking into Disney World. And I want you to imagine that you are plucked up from this place. In fact, you are plucked even out of this time and into a place and a time where there was no place or time. And you find yourself seated in a celestial place. In the heavenly realms, you're seated. And before you begin to see God. In fact, he's put you there so you can see him. And it's sort of visual. Yeah, it's definitely visual. But it's not just visual. It's something more than that. As you're there and you're observing and you're enjoying and you're sensing, it's every sense about you and then some is getting this, is seeing this, is feeling this. God, the Father and the Son and the Holy Dance engaged there, or the Holy Son and Spirit engaged there in this dance. You could never describe it except that you know it, that you see it, and you can hear it. You can smell it. It's this amazing, beautiful thing like you've never seen before as the three persons of the Godhead are engaged with one another. And just in that moment, there's something about that tells you that this has always been.